Uncertainty, pressure, change. The people who navigate this world tend to have something in common. They've been at the edge and they know what that taught them. I'm Charlie Peschardt, and this is the Resilient Edge podcast. Today on the Resilient Edge, we have Andrea Gamson. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. We'll kick off with my standard opening question, which is to ask your interpretation of how we know each other.
Well, our story's quite an interesting one. It's so interesting, it worked its way into the book that I published last year. But I suppose the high-level overview would be that we really connected during a period of probably both being in that kind of yes mode, when we might say yes to things we normally wouldn't, for example. And you took us to a talk called How to Launch a Social Enterprise Overseas. I remember it quite vividly, and it just really opened my mind to loads of different things. And then, there was a huge ripple effect of changes that happened for both of us in our careers. I think we were bonding at the time. We were being ready for a change and not quite sure how to go about it and feeling perhaps a bit stuck.
Yeah, that's right. I was in the process of leaving the Navy, so that would be 2013. And it was hosted by Escape the City, that talk. And then you ended up doing some social enterprise work in foreign countries, right, off the back of that.
Within 3 months, I had gone from being in a talk about how to launch a social enterprise overseas to then launching a social enterprise overseas.
I don't think I'd actually fully recognised how quick the time frame was for you. What were you doing before?
It's a good question. I was working in a social enterprise as an employee, but I was still doing the same job I did beforehand when I worked in national mainstream media. And it was like a transition role in a social enterprise where I was a commercial head doing business development. But it opened my eyes to this world of social enterprise that I'd never really heard of before. I was like, what? There's businesses that do good where people are happy to work there and they like each other and they actually want to hang out with each other after work. Like, what is this? So you probably caught me at like quite an interesting point where I was then exploring my what next after that. So I'd seen the good, the bad and the ugly of the media industry and come out realizing that, big companies and brands do actually care and want to do some like really great work and great work that would be impactful in a socially or environmentally way. But I just knew I wanted to do something on my own, but I didn't know what it was.
And then you ended up setting up your own initiative. Is that right?
Yeah. So off the back of going to Escape the City's talk, Escape the City, for those that don't know, it's still going now. Very successful. Really is a career change platform that advertises lots of purpose-driven jobs in charities, NGOs, big companies, B Corps, for example. And so off the back of going to that talk with you, I then had a little look around to see what was on there. I was very curious and found a role overseas that would take me more in the path of the direction I wanted to go in, which was to support young entrepreneurs. And so I thought, you know what, why don't I treat myself like a social enterprise if I'm freelancing, which was where I felt the direction was going in for me? Why don't I give, say, 25% of my time every year back to, groups of people who need support through volunteering, and then I can work the other 75% of the time and fund my year like that. That was the thinking. So off I went to Kenya and started volunteering as a program manager for an incredible social enterprise called Balloon. And they were very much dedicated to supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs in Kenya to, I suppose, to like solve problems in their community through entrepreneurship, and for entrepreneurship to be the vehicle to create social change. That was really interesting. And it was really inspiring. Only I started to notice that it was great, but there was this piece of me that really wanted to focus on supporting those that were creating a social impact. So becoming a supporter, if you will, to the social impact creators, that emerged as quite a strong piece. And at the same time, I was working with another volunteer and she was starting to develop similar ideas. And, we came together and started brainstorming. And then the next thing you know, the next thing we knew, we had a client and they wanted to fund her and I to start training up a young group of aspiring social entrepreneurs. And so Social Starters was born, but we never imagined it to become a big company or to be going for the next 9 years. It was very much just a field experiment. Look, an opportunity's come our way. Let's say yes and figure out how to do it later mentality, which is a famous Richard Branson quote that I've always clung on to. And then, we just gave it 3 months and thought, look, we like this model that we're currently in with Balloon, where they're bringing out international, in their case, they were students at the time. So they're bringing international bachelor's and master's students to come to Kenya to then support the entrepreneurs to grow their business models. And my thinking, as was my business partner at the time, was around, well, that's great and all, but what if we got people, instead of students, what if we looked at skilled professionals with 20 years under their belt in finance or marketing or sales growth, those kinds of things, where they've grown businesses and they can legitimately be a mentor or a consultant or a coach to the entrepreneur and share their wealth of experience and knowledge about how to do that in their conditions, in their climates, wherever they worked. And we thought that was quite intriguing. So we put it out there. It was just one of those real crazy moments where you think no one's going to reply to this. But they did. The rest is history. Fast forward a couple of years, we were in 4 or 5 different countries around the world, and we were working with hundreds of skilled professionals who were itchy, feeling stuck, keen to do something with purpose, maybe take a time out or start their own thing. Yeah, it just grew from there and took up the next beautiful 9 years of my life and then became a book.
Yeah, we'll talk about the book in a minute because it's a great read that. But yeah, the idea of bringing skilled professionals into that entrepreneurial mentorship space, I think is just such a great concept. International development, international aid has a bit of a hard rap at the moment. And I think some of that is very justified. I've seen some projects that go extremely well, and I've seen some other projects that don't go so well. So to be able to bring people with proven track records that are motivated by purpose rather than money to come and help people in need seems like a really good addition to the development world. In terms of like the scale of that, you said 4 or 5 countries that you were working in. Was that like a full-time program or was it like project based? You're doing like a few cohorts a year. How did that actually run?
We ran multiple cohorts, sometimes simultaneously. And it initially started as a 6-week offering that was fully immersive, where you'd go and live and work in the country that you've chosen to go to, that you invest to go to as well. So these were self-funded volunteer projects that you would take on as an individual. And it was called the immersion program. Later, it became the Social Starters program. But ultimately, they would volunteer their time 4 or 5 days of the week for those 6 weeks to give their skills back to a particular project or a number of projects, at the grassroots. Sometimes those programs were themed as well. So I remember doing a women's development one in Tamil Nadu in India. We did creative young entrepreneur ones around the time of the Rio Olympics in Brazil. We'd do a food program in Sri Lanka. And then these themes would attract people in who had a passion for that theme or wanted to work maybe in the space around that theme as well. And then that made it really targeted rather than completely random.
Such a good program.
There were times, I'll be honest, where the reality of the whole thing was so consuming. Because when you start a business, in some ways, it's a really good thing that you don't know what you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
You almost need to not know, because if you did know what it was going to involve, you possibly wouldn't do it. It would put you off. And so many things happened, as they often do in challenging, unpredictable environments. And that then led us, like both my business partner and I, to our own versions of burnout. And then at times we had to pause delivery and take stock and reflect. And then sometimes in those pauses, I would go out and find other projects, start new things. And also nourish my mind and sometimes do something a bit different.
I've heard this from a couple of entrepreneurs I've been speaking to recently about the you don't know what you don't know, and if you did, you probably wouldn't do it in the first place. How do you keep going when it gets tough? And you spoke about burnout. How do you manage that as well?
The first part of all of this is about alignment. So many people start businesses that are not properly aligned with who they are, their vision, their values, everything that they're all about, and they haven't done the deep work. Perhaps just something landed on their lap or they had an idea and they ran with it. If you haven't done that work, it's tricky when it gets tough. And then you've got to decide, do I really commit to this or do I jump off the train? And either way, that decision for a lot of people, maybe not everybody, but for a lot of people, that decision can be really, really knotty and very consuming and take quite a lot of time to land on the final decision. But if you do the work, if you follow the 6 P's of purpose framework, for example, which is in my book, and you find yourself landing on the thing that is really what you would feel you were put on this planet to do, you'll find your path through the most difficult of times because you'll be so aligned with it. I think that's the difference for me. You know, in some cases with entrepreneurship, you have to learn it yourself. And often that's the hard way. They're the leadership lessons that are the ones that stick the most. And they're in my book.
I, it's great, great plug for the book. I love it. You've written the book about social starters, and also, can we talk about how that links into what you've been doing since social starters as well?
Yeah. So, social starters make changing the world your business. Came out at the back end of last year after about 8 years of doing the work as a social starter, but then also recognizing the different types of social starter that there are out there in the world and working with hundreds and hundreds of different professionals across all of those different pathways and then seeing the outcome of that exposure that they'd had, really, I suppose, it supported them to transition their career in whatever way they were. And for some, it's about being the entrepreneur within the organization they already work in, leveraging the tools and resources that they already have. And for others, it is about the radical change and the blow your life up and quit your job and in some cases go overseas. And for other people, you know, just do something completely different. And then there's these other pathways in between. And along the way, though, the saddest part for me was closing Social Starters, the business down. But writing the book then became a natural way for me to make peace with that, because then it meant the legacy of all of that great insight, the research, the learnings, the great impact of all of that behavioral change and all those transformations then lived on, and it was able to reach a wider audience as a result. And so in closing the business down, because after COVID, socioeconomically, things just really, really changed. And it was just really, really, it was a time of like great difficulty convincing people to come and do something that involved potentially changing their career. And also I was changing, and I went off to study a degree, a master's, and I chose a really, really challenging, very eye-opening topic, and it was regenerative economics, and it was completely life-changing for me because it taught me all about the economics of the world that our hearts long to see, which is the world beyond the mechanistic system that we currently have that clearly isn't working. And so we start to open up a world of systems thinking within that. Like thinking in systems is about seeing the whole of the ecosystem around the thing that we're doing. So it's not just the thing that we're looking at, but we're thinking bigger than that and seeing how everything interacts with each other. And this then becomes about really dynamic relationships. So in economics terms, this is about building a world and communities where people can thrive. We have high well-being, low carbon communities. And potentially, whilst it can sometimes sound a bit utopian, this is about designing the world that would mean future generations still have a world to live in where they can thrive in it. And essentially, we don't fuck everything up and kill the planet. So then I left that with my worldview having completely changed. A way that I look at the world was completely blown up. And there was no way I could unsee what I'd seen. And so sitting there, I remember thinking, what can I do with the skills that I've got? And something kept coming through to me, like quite repeatedly, around the short-term goals of rapid decarbonisation and the role that our business economy in the UK, yes, is a global problem, but I live here in the UK. This is my place, right? So what can I do here in my place that can impact the fact that we needed to rapidly decarbonise? And there were these tipping points where if we went over them, we would never be able to reverse the climate catastrophe that would come off the back of that. This is a really heartbreaking thing to realise is happening, but it is happening. And so I just felt I really need to solve this problem. I'm not going to be the one to solve the problem. I need to work in my little pocket, in the area that I can, with the skills that I've got to solve it. So I created Netshift, which is a women-led social enterprise. We're a community interest company, and we're on a mission to support small to medium businesses in the southwest of the UK, where I live now, to get on the path to net zero. So then that was a bit of a tick, because I was thinking, okay, I can do my bit here. I'm a business advisor now. Like, this is my arena. I just need to learn about sustainability consulting. So what better way to do that by going and surrounding myself by loads of amazing sustainability consultants and bringing them in? Because that's what a great leader does, isn't it? They recognize where they've got a gap, and you go and find the people that fill that gap, and you create a brilliant team around it. So that was that. But then there's this other piece that was gnawing away at me, which was like the bigger problem of how business is so extractive, and our leaders who move through businesses to go and lead these companies, if they're never exposed to social issues or solutions to social change, if they don't know what environmental issues are, if they don't understand about the ecosystemic collapse that we're facing, how can they then make better leadership decisions? And so this piece started to link a little bit back to social starters, because whilst that was a bit of a career change program, corporate firms would sometimes come to me and go, "You're really good at getting people to quit their job and go and do something different, but could you help us retain our best talent so that they don't leave?" And so I then pulled that question back in and have tried to answer it with what I then created, which was Regenerous. So Regenerous is like a regenerative leadership mentoring program for corporate executives who then get matched to social change makers, social entrepreneurs, ecological leaders who are at the grassroots, who are solving all of these challenges that I've just been talking about in their own unique ways. And I bring them together to solve problems, design better futures, and learn from each other in two-way exchanges. There's those different ways that we do it. And that to me felt like the longer term piece around really changing the system through developing leadership. So I straddle those two things most of my time.
You're talking about linking corporate and social entrepreneurs together as part of environmental leadership for the future. I was just curious to understand what similarities and what differences you see between those different types of people in how they view leadership.
I love that. Look, all people have so many things in common around waking up to the fact that we were sold a vision of the world that we're now collectively starting to realize isn't necessarily the truth. And I'm increasingly realizing that it's not an us and them, as in them being the corporate leaders and us being the quirky social entrepreneurs doing something nice in the community. Oh, aren't they sweet? 15 years ago, there was a bit of that, definitely. But there's a real profound mutual respect between these two groups of leaders who do start initially with a bunch of preconceptions about each other. And those preconceptions inevitably get challenged, and then they change as they get to know each other fairly quickly. And what's stripped away, outside of all of the different ways that these two groups of people might be packaged up, if you will, and all of the stereotypes that come with that, is that you've got humanity at its core. When you see people come in with certain perceptions in mind of like what their entrepreneur is going to be like and vice versa, and then you see that change, because doing this kind of work is a huge leveler for making everybody an equal in the process. Like the old ways of mentoring, you might be familiar with these old ways where you would imagine a CEO of some blue chip corporate firm coming along, or a finance director, and there's certain demographics, certain type of person, usually male, and you've got this aura of like, I'm an oracle, I know things. And you know what? Like that is just sending a message to the world, isn't it? That we all have to like look upwards at the person at the top, and we're perpetuating a certain paradigm. Our mentoring programs will throw together, in some cases, the intern from the corporate firm with a very well seasoned CEO of a social enterprise. And it's just amazing what magic happens. Like, no mentor is ever like the mentor you think you're going to get. And the entrepreneurs are probably never like the entrepreneur they think they're going to get. And what this does is it just, breaks down walls, creates humanity and a real human experience where you realize, yes, there is good in the world. You get your faith back in humanity. And you realize, actually, do you know what? As the mentor, if you will, I've got lots of skills that are transferable. I can lean in more over here and be a bit more confident about my skills, actually. And perhaps I'm recognizing through this experience, I've got some gaps over there. And so I'm learning about my leadership as I'm going through this process. And then exactly the same experience happens for the entrepreneur. And so these are learning journeys that are so rich and so fruitful and are really all about two people showing up and being open, and they're in their yes mode. They're also recognizing that sometimes they won't have the answers and it's okay. And they don't need to be an expert and know everything about everything. But what they're doing is holding space for each other to say, okay, when this gets messy, let's figure it out together.
How do you see the outcomes of this program? Are there changes that organizations have made as a result of the mentoring?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, my clients keep coming back repeating year after year, which is really affirming that they love it. They often tell me anecdotally that this is the best part of their job working on this program, or it's the best CSR program that they do. So I know that it's impactful because they're seeing their employees with a greater entrepreneurial mindset or a growth mindset that demonstrates itself in the way that they're, leading their own teams. And of course, if they go on and get promotions as a result of these great learnings and lessons, like they've had the field experience version, if you will, they've
Hmm.
had that in order to have their leadership muscle really tested. So there's so much value in all of that. And of course, you're retaining your employees, and thus the business case is that you're then saving money because every time you have to replace somebody, it's really expensive. But also, if you lose somebody along the journey because they've had an awakening moment, then also that's really great, isn't it? Because a good company should be happy to let people go if it's not a fit anymore, because then the impact on that could be, lower productivity. It has a cost, doesn't it? So there's lots of really great stuff there on that side. And then for the social entrepreneurs, I get told I now know my business can work where I used to just think maybe it can. Or I hear my mentors have helped me. I don't know, it could be created new tools that allow me to analyze the way my business works in a whole new way, or I've had fresh thinking on a problem that I've never thought of it through that lens before. Or sometimes it's like you just cut straight through to some real knotty problem. You cut straight through to the heart of it because you've got outside eyes looking in on it that are not tangled up in the politics of the whole thing in the first place, that sometimes we as leaders can be. And then it's stopping us from seeing the solution. So there's a lot of that goes on, which I hear anecdotally. But of course, we also collect feedback more on the quantitative side as we go through these programs. And of course, post program. And a lot of the social entrepreneurs keep coming back and they hop from one program to the next because they love the value that they get so much from it.
It's so fascinating to hear how this has grown over the years as well and really established now. The point you're making there about the staff retention, or indeed, letting them go if they suddenly find that they're in the wrong place and they need to do something they consider to be more purposeful. I think it's really interesting for looking at it through the organizational resilience lens around the people element of it. And this is where I'm really trying to bring like resilience and leadership together a bit more. So let me ask you what your view on resilience is in today's world.
So yes, there's the organizational resilience of the whole system of the organization. Then there's the individual resilience of the team, and then the people individually in it as well, right? And some of this is about the organization being responsible for it, and for others, it's the self-leadership that we have to cultivate within ourselves. So there's a lot of things going on here, isn't there, that make up resilience. But the organizations that can work towards this, there's no perfect way of doing it. That's the beautiful thing about growth, isn't it? That there is a messy part where a culture of growth needs to have failure in it, because that's how people learn. It's how they test where the boundaries are. It's how they learn to explore ideas when they get them and have the confidence to go out there and try stuff without fearing, if this doesn't work, then I'm going to lose my job, or I'll be ostracized within the company because I effed it up. It's really, really important to have a culture of encouraged failure. But of course, there needs to be a sense of mitigated risk around that so that the failures aren't so catastrophic that it's like a problem. And that's really hard to do because there's a certain amount of like loss that will happen in there, and that will come at a cost. So it's leaders need to have a think about, I believe, what is the opportunity cost in the
Mhm.
failure. And how do you create a safe environment around that and encourage people to step forward without it seeming like, oh no, this actually is just a bit of BS. They're saying all the right things, but the reality is, it's not really meant. And sometimes that's because then the leaders themselves aren't showing it from, they're not practicing what they preach. They aren't being transparent, and they aren't communicating around their own failures and times that they've tried things and they didn't work. That's a bit like around organizational resilience, individual resilience. This comes up quite a lot in workshops that I do around like, what does leadership resilience look like? What does it mean to you? And I think it's interesting that I'm talking to you with a military background, and a lot of the leaders that you've had come on your podcast come from a certain, if it's fair to say, like very male dominated industries and sectors, right?
Mhm.
But feminine leadership might say, well, is resilience like about being tough, strong, being able to fight back? I think there's a bit of stigma around resilience being like a certain amount of mental toughness. And what I've really seen resilience being is about being able to fail. It's about being able to fall down and have a certain amount of emotion and feeling around that and allowing that to come to the fore, even though it can be really murky. But it's about how you come back and what do you do with it? What do you learn from that? And what's your attitude around failure? And then how do you grow? But I think to do that in a really safe way, like resilient people will probably have an approach, right? They'll understand that there's a certain amount of risk to this leap that I want to take, and they'll understand whether the leap is taking them too far into the fear zone or just enough outside of the comfort zone that they'll develop a muscle for change. And if they can move that muscle for change in small increments, they'll then move into the growth zone and the learning zone. And then whatever glass ceiling they've set for themselves, they'll realize that they can smash through it and then set the bar even higher. And it moves beyond the preconceived limits that were previously set based on what everybody's self-belief levels were around what's possible and what they can achieve.
It's very interesting to look at that limiting belief and the impact it has on people. And as you're describing, the need for people to recognize where they have the opportunity to grow and then take those often small steps, but repeating them regularly to build up that muscle and the ability to drive change is so important. And then the other piece for me is the environment they're doing that within. So if that's within an organization or if it's within a team in their personal life, a relationship, it's a process. And to have the self-awareness in the first place to recognize, oh, this, whatever this is today doesn't have to be what this is forever.
High performing teams, sales teams, leadership teams, senior exec teams are investing in self-awareness programs now. It's becoming, and has been over the last few years, quite a big investment area. The last, 10, 15, 20 years of business, there's been a shift, hasn't there, around going from, there's a veneer or a facade of what wants to be presented by the leadership team to the outside world or within the organization to employees. That veneer has been very protective. It's brittle to a certain extent. It's not entirely authentic. And then over the last number of years, there's been a real sense of, values driven performance within teams now, and not just saying it, but then also walking the talk, right? It depends on like the type of company, the industry, who the leaders are, what it is that they do, and who the people are that work there. But where we're seeing really amazing shifts within organizations is when those values are running through absolutely everything from who you hire to the training and support that you give to employees to the type of organization that you create and the output of the work that you're creating as well.
This broader point about people being slightly more honest and open about where the challenges are has to be a good thing, because we can't all go around pretending that everything's perfect, because quite clearly that is not where we're at globally.
No, the government is not perfect. The people running the country are clearly far from perfect, as we are increasingly discovering. I think we've grown up looking to those in charge and in power and thought, well, they know what they're doing. They're like some sort of special breed of human that only needs 3 hours sleep a night. And they've all gone to the same university or the same private school, and that maybe they know things we just don't. They've been bred a certain type of way, right? And therefore I feel safe. I
Mm.
feel like I can sleep at night knowing that they're dealing with all of the shit. They've got all the problems, but they've got those special set of skills to handle them. I think we are increasingly realizing that that is not the case, that they are making it all up as they go along, just like every other entrepreneur and business leader. To a certain extent, you might have lived experience or, years, behind your belt doing the work, and so of course you've learned things along the way that you can draw on. But every single day in this current, let's just use the VUCA acronym, volatile, uncertain, and ambiguous, that world is throwing things at leaders left, right, and center almost every single day, week, month, year that we've never seen before. And I think this ties back into the resilience piece. How can you be resilient in a world that you're not prepared for? And so then
Mm.
we start to move into a conversation, don't we, around like preparedness and business continuity. Prepared for what? For, well, economic shocks, environmental collapse, social collapse in some cases. Look how many wars and conflicts are now going on. And it's not just happening in that country. And, the effect of that is all of the supply chain issues, if we're going to just speak to like the issues then that businesses have. But then that gets even bigger when we start talking about a lack of food sovereignty and issues then around like, how are we going to feed our people? And is there going to be enough food in the shops to put on the table? Then we start to go like, oh, well, actually that war in whatever country does then affect me and my community and my village and my children.
I think that's exactly right. The hyperconnectivity now of everything. And we saw it really in COVID very clearly. Sure you remember as well as everyone else, the rush for toilet paper. But there's so many challenges around the fragility of the supply chain. And a lot of these things can't be prepared for in terms of a mitigation, but it can be in terms of an adaptation. And so you're right, people do not have the capability of managing this in the current systems that exist as they are. And I think that's the most interesting / terrifying in some ways. The future shift that's about to happen is really challenging, because we just don't know what it's going to look like. There's so much going on so quickly, and it feels like democracy's not able to deal with it very well. News cycle isn't able to deal with it very well. And then the organizational resilience piece starts becoming second almost to the individual resilience piece.
There's a lot to unpack in what you're saying here, but what was coming through me, if I could share something, globalization, the big poster child of change in the 90s. What a great dream it was. It hasn't lasted very long, and now we're talking about localization needing to be the
Hmm.
solution and taking everything back in-house, small batch, like on our doorstep. So that I guess to be more resilient, we're not reliant on all of these unpredictable, uncertain unknowns of what's going to happen within the global context.
Mm.
And what's really sad about all of that is, war and conflict is a very complex beast and there's a lot of history involved. But in simplistic terms, those conflicts really are popping off as part of a broader issue around like a race for resources and resource control. I think that's like everybody understands that, even though there's a lot more nuance behind it. Fundamentally, that resource race is causing the issues because we're all scrabbling around fighting after a finite amount of resources on a planet. Daniel Christian Weil, who says that we have a demand for about 3 planets worth of resources
Mm.
on a 1 planet living. But, thinking more positively, the business model of the future, wouldn't it be great if a company has, and there are examples of this, like Troidos in Bristol
Hmm.
and Ecotricity. Why can't we have companies that are self-sustaining, thinking about sustaining a system and creating an ecosystem that's self-sustaining, and then really asking quite challenging questions around this business. What does it do? What's its purpose? How are we impacting the planet and the people in the community and those that work for us? Contributing in a positive way, giving back. And also, what are we really, really doing in order to make sure that we're producing something that has like real value for the future of what this planet needs and the people on it need? And it's difficult. But at the same time, like, does that not just present a really interesting opportunity to sit down and, either think about your own career, if that bothers you, or to sit down and think, well, how can I facilitate this conversation with the people that I work with in order to see what good can we do, even if it's just like that micro change. If everybody did that, if every single company on the planet made a 1% positive change, just imagine the impact that would make.
It'd be huge, wouldn't it? And I think like taking the marginal gains from sport, people are very happy to invest a lot of time on that if they believe there to be a positive financial return. But if it's an environmental return, people aren't necessarily quite so motivated in many cases. I think this is where there is a challenge in the system. And so interesting to see how this does develop over the next few years. And hopefully more and more people will be engaging with their challenges in their personal life and at work in the way that you're describing, of trying to think about it and then do something, even if it is something small.
Yeah. And they've got to meet people where they're at. So,
Mm.
throwing down the gauntlet at somebody that's quite far removed, let's say it's one of the 1% richest people on the planet. So they're potentially quite, unless they're environmentalists or activists, they're quite far away from being within the problem because it's a completely different world. And then, there's a lot of people that are, probably quite like high up in business, earning lots of money. And, they've got their lives and they're quite far away from these challenges, environmental issues, for example. They might find themselves saying, do you know what? I don't really care about the planet. Like, tomorrow problem, that's not a me problem. Short termism, because it always comes back to this, doesn't it? Short term thinking and long term thinking. That's the problem. And if we care about our families and our children and our children's children, why doesn't that extend to future generations and our children's 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 children? How come that care seems to have a stop off point? Because when you start to apply seventh generational thinking and you look ahead to that much further down the line, like, it's really, really interesting exercise. And actually, I'd implore all CEOs and leadership teams to do this exercise and go, look, let's imagine 250 years into the future, it will all start to unravel, to be honest, by the time you get to about year 30. And you realize you can't predict
Yeah.
what the future's going to look like beyond that point anyway, because it's going to change at such an exponential rate. But what we do know is that we can't reverse, climate disaster beyond those tipping points, which are increasingly creeping up in a few years' time.
And it's a hard one, that not being able to predict the future does mean so many people are comfortable turning a blind eye to the downside of the world that we're currently building. Would recommend to you, Scott Galloway is professor at YU, does a great TED talk on future generations. And he opens with a question for the audience: do you love your children? And then proceeds to demonstrate to them why their actions don't support their yes answer. I'll put the link in the show notes. It's fascinating. So, Andrea, we're talking about the state of the world, the future of the world. What skills or character traits would you say are most valuable for navigating the change that humankind is going through at the moment?
I actually think about this question quite a lot. The obvious one is entrepreneurialism, isn't it? I always refer to Sarah Svathy, and she has coined a term called effectuation and another one called affordable loss. And effectuation is a way of thinking that is non-linear, that is very much, the entrepreneurial method of learning from your customers and building things that customers want, the lean startup model. Um, Affordable loss criteria is the idea of working out what you're willing to lose in terms of your investment to find out if your big idea or your exciting new career choice or whatever it is, your new project at work, the marketing campaign, what is it that you're willing to lose in order to find out if your assumptions about it, to find out that, to break down the steps and understand, could this work? If you could do it on a micro level, can it then be scaled? So say, for example, to spend $5,000 or to, risk your time to invest in this thing. And so you create a container around that. And this is the risk mitigation piece. So that way of thinking, entrepreneurial thinking, is such a valuable skill. It doesn't mean you have to go and launch a business, but those skills can be used in all areas of your life. I would just wonder, what if the biggest leaders of our time were instilling entrepreneurialism into their employees? I wonder exponentially what could be created, the appetite for risk that would get learned, how the fear of failure would reduce. And perhaps we would unleash and unlock a whole new generation of talent to go out and solve the greatest challenges of our time. Whereas at the moment, we're just going to outsource that to AI, aren't we? Which to me feels like it's a little bit lazy. It's also exciting, I know, but I'm also still really interested in human potential.
And so building on that, I'm a reasonably new parent, so I'm very interested in the future of the world and how to raise humans to thrive within it. What advice would you give a 2-year-old girl of how to get on in the world that we're living in and the world that we're building?
Be curious. Follow your instincts. Do not squash any thoughts down that you think are too bold or too wild or too crazy or too out there or too. If the word too is in front of it, that probably means that's exactly what you need to be going and exploring and doing. And don't worry about having to commit. Just go play, create. If you have got a natural curiosity for something, that is almost like your inner voice giving you a bit of guidance, and you just never know where it's going to lead, because you might be about to go out and invent the big thing that we haven't even seen coming yet, that is exactly what the world needs.
Love it. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for your time today. Before you go, what's coming up next for you and how can people get in touch?
Add me on LinkedIn or follow me on Instagram, Andrea Gamson. Socialimpact.support is the website. The email is hello@socialimpact.support. I'm an open door. Feel free to reach out. Come and say hi.
In terms of your book, how do people get hold of that?
AndreaGamson.com. Go buy a copy directly from me and it will be signed. But if you're not in the UK, go to all online bookstores. You'll find it there. I also have a course, The Inner Quest. I designed this 6-week course, which is almost like Social Starters, the like 2.0, if you will. It's called The Inner Quest. And it's self-study, self-paced. You can do it on your own terms, in your own time. You have access to me. You can get coached one-on-one to help you pick through some of the things that come through. And it works through the 6 Ps of purpose, my methodology in the Social Starters Make Change in the World Your Business book. And I've been piloting it for the last 6 months and I'm getting really good feedback. And I want more people to go through it and give me more feedback so that I can make it an even bigger and better course.
Great stuff. Thanks, Andrea. And yeah, I can definitely attest to the book being an excellent read. So go and buy that straight away. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Great to catch up.
Awesome. See you soon.
Bye. If this conversation has given you something to think about leading through pressure, navigating change, or building the kind of clarity that holds even when things get tough, that is exactly what I work on at The Resilience Edge. You can find me, Charlie Peschardt, on LinkedIn, on Instagram at The Resilience Edge Coaching, or via my website, theresilienceedge.com. Whether you're looking to think more clearly under pressure in your personal or professional life, or leading an organisation building the resilience to survive and thrive through uncertainty and change, come find me and sharpen your resilient edge.